Today I'll be talking to you about cloud carbon auditing and why you don't need another server and our approach at Platform.sh. I am Platform.sh's environmental impact officer. My background is in climate science, and I've been working in the area of international sustainability throughout my career. And my last job was with the IPCC as a senior science officer, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And when I saw the impact part of this job, I became very interested because I've gone to a lot of scientific meetings or political meetings where we discuss climate change, but I really want to see action and I really want to reduce carbon and wherever I can, but particularly I think I'm going to show you why I think it's important to do it in the cloud. Okay, so just to give you an overview of the talk today, I'm going to be talking about a little bit about climate change because I'm passionate about it, can't stop talking about it. And then the role of the ICT community and why this is relevant, and then a mode strategy that we've developed to think about the steps you need to take in order to understand and then reduce emissions in the cloud. So about climate change, maybe you're all familiar with this. This is a profile of CO2 in our atmosphere over time. It goes back 800,000 years. This is the way climate scientists think in long time frames. And you can see this cyclic pattern here. These are interglacials, these are glacial periods, and then you see this amazing spike in CO2. So now we're at over 400 ppms, parts per million of CO2 in our atmosphere. This is the signature of climate change that we see here. And scientists tell us we need to be at 350 to be at the safe operating level for humanity. So we've kind of overshot that. Now, maybe everyone is on the call is familiar with net zero, but there's a lot going on with respect to net zero and legislation, discussion, international negotiations, and just to try to demystify net zero in general. This is just a general portfolio figure from South Pole. So we have this increase of CO2. This is what we saw in the last graph. And if we continue as business as usual, at some point, we expect to burn fewer fossil fuels. But what we know is to remain under the 2-degree warming that the Paris Agreement laid out with the aspiration to keep warming to 1.5, we need to get to net zero by 2050. And the EU has already said we understand that. And so the EU initially, when it signed the Paris objective, I think their objective was 40%. And then at one point it went to 50 or 55. And now with the latest COP that we had at Sharm el-Sheikh, the objective is to reduce all of our greenhouse gases by 57% in 8 years. So that's the path that we're on. And in order to do that, we need to reduce our use of resources, particularly anything dealing with carbon-based burning of fossil fuels, but also the way we have to look at the way we do agriculture. There's many different ways to reduce. And then we can also have, we could be carbon neutral today if we use offsets, and I'll get to what those are. But then there's another whole collection of activities that we can do here, which is carbon removal to get us to this net zero carbon by 2050. So this is just kind of the pathway that we're on. There are laws that are coming into place. Each country has it, or well, in this case, region has its own objectives. But just to let you know, and then there are different reporting standards that are coming in as well, CSRD in terms of EU sustainability reporting for large companies over 250, of which carbon accounting will be one. Okay, so I just mentioned carbon offsets and carbon removal. So just to go through this, so if you emit 1 ton of carbon, and just to give you an idea of what 1 ton of carbon is, That's about equivalent of taking one airplane trip between Paris, New York, and back again. So you might say, hey, I'm going to offset my flight for that. And you pay someone to do that, and they, let's say, support a renewable energy project somewhere. What has happened is you haven't invested in the transition to the renewable energy sector, okay? If you use a high quality carbon offset, and we can get into that. But what has happened at the end of the day is there's 1 ton of CO2 that still was emitted, and a little bit more from getting that new project up and running. And you know, the cost to offset is about 10 to 50 bucks per ton. Okay, carbon removal is different. You have 1 ton of CO2 removed, you can pay a lot more and get 1 ton of CO2 removed from the atmosphere, and carbon removal is net zero compatible. So just to give you an overview of that. So role of the IT community. Why am I talking about this today? Well, currently, the information communication technology generally is putting out about 4% of all greenhouse gases. That puts it on the same level as the aviation sector. So it has a substantial impact, of which the cloud is over 1%. So this is all ICT emissions, life cycle approach, and all the rest. And what I want to show you on this graph is obviously it's expected to grow. And this graph, then this is time again on the bottom, and we go out to 2040, and our emissions from the ICT sector could be as high as 15%. And what I want to stress here is we're at this inflection point here. The choices we make today will affect what pathway we are as we go forward, and how much greenhouse gases are finally emitted. Okay, so that's the overview of climate change. I'll just say a little bit about Platform.sh if you haven't heard about us. So we're an end-to-end solution for developers for web hosting. We help teams, really focus on the developer experience and the content, and we take care of all the rest, the infrastructure, the compliance, security, all that. And soon I'll talk about the carbon clouds reporting. Okay, so just to give you an idea, because we rent instances of platforms, in the cloud, we don't have any data centers. Our carbon reporting are in this scope. We look at the data centers and we look at network. Life cycle analysis of the data center, including not only the servers, their electricity use, refrigerant leaks, all the rest. Over time, how long each computer is used, but also the network. So we go all the way from the data center gate to your router. And that includes mobile net, But what we don't do, and is not part of the greenhouse gas protocol, which we follow, which is the international protocol on greenhouse gases, we don't take into account the emissions from the final device, the computer, the laptop, the mobile, the tablet, whatever. And that's just by definition. That's just applying the rules. And so those scopes are not lost. They are in the scopes of the manufacturers of these devices. So just to be clear what we're talking about here. Okay, so compared to that first graph I show you where you see 800,000 years, obviously cloud computing and cloud auditing is in its infancy, and we're learning a lot. It's been a fascinating ride so far. What is clear is the cloud is less resource intensive than on-premises, and that's just through mutualization. And this study from Accenture and Microsoft, which is from 2010, shows that it can be anywhere from 30 to 90% less intense in terms of its emissions, with particularly smaller businesses seeing the biggest benefits of these mutualizations. I'm going to go through in detail what a location-based approach is, which is the approach we use in carbon accounting. Then we'll talk about why transparency is so important in this sector. I'll go through just generally the approach used in the cloud to calculate greenhouse gases, but it's always best to have an actual carbon auditor, particularly as new standards come into place. And then as you will see, a lot is changing in this area, and we're following the literature to see how it changes. Also, if anyone has a newer article on why the cloud is less resource intensive, I'm interested in it. Okay, so one question that I always get for people who are new to the cloud is, I don't think I really need to worry about carbon, any carbon coming from the cloud, because my provider says they're using 100% renewable energy. They are carbon neutral, and they have net zero emission, target dates. And so what we have here are, so obviously Google Cloud Product is here, Microsoft Azure is the triangle, we have Amazon Web Services, and then OVH and Orange are here in terms of cloud providers. And this shows you in time where their promises come. So most of them are say that they're using renewable energy. Orange says they'll get there by 50%, but sometime between 2025 and 2030. And Google Cloud says it's been that way since 2015. The reason they can say this is because of agreements that they have signed, pieces of paper, called power purchase agreements, or CFE, certificates for renewable energy. And I'm going to get into much more detail on that in 2 slides. But just to give you that, then they are carbon neutral claims, and even Google retroactively went back and bought those carbon offsets that we saw. So they're all aiming to be carbon neutral. And then they have net zero objectives that are much more ambitious than even the EU's objectives. So just to give you an idea. So they're going big on this carbon removal. Okay, so before I can talk about the PPAs, give you an idea of the electricity map for the world. This is from electricitymaps.com. And I always put a date on these graphs because the electricity grid is greening, and anything in green has a carbon intensity of less than 100 grams CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. And then the darker you go, the more carbon intensive. So you're going much more into using coal in areas such as here. Okay, so all of these data centers run on the underlying electricity grid that's shown here. And on this particular map, this is just where we have some servers running because we're a multi-cloud provider. Okay, so I said I would get into the pieces of paper and talk about market-based versus location-based. So market-based is you're using PPAs and CFEs to calculate, the electricity, how much CO2 is released. So most cloud providers, Google Cloud Product is the exception, will give you a market-based approach. And so when you have a market-based dashboard, you're using these power purchase agreements, which are extremely important because they are long-term commitments to financially supporting renewable energy. But they are one-to-one in terms of electricity, and they don't have to be one-to-one in terms of carbon. And that's why the standard is to use the location-based approach when reporting your CO2. So if you have the same work package running in Germany compared to running in Sweden, the electricity will be the same, but the CO2 won't. And that's when you see the difference here, that is location-based, and when it looks the same, that's market-based. Okay, so now this is the mode strategy where we measure, optimize, deploy, and educate. So the first part is measuring. I've been talking a lot about the protocol that's used here by anyone reporting carbon. So scope 1 is emissions from the office. And because Platform.sh is a nearly 100% remote company, we have a tiny office with a tiny scope 1 and a tiny scope 2 for electricity use at the office. And everything else is in scope 3. Most corporations find that they have a very large scope 3, so that's typical. For us, it's dominated by the renting of the cloud instances and business travel. And this year we did our first commission study of remote work, which is really interesting, and that went into scope 3 as well. Okay, so overall, when you calculate how much CO2 is being emitted in the cloud, you take into account the embodied emissions, so from the full life cycle analysis of the data center, the actual servers, how long they're used, and the operational emissions. And under operational emissions, we're looking at the pillars of compute, storage, and network, plus other, which I will get into, the CDN there, as well as refrigerant leaks and other parts. This is just the overall approach. It's kind of a nice website because it gives you the open source approach to calculating carbon in the web. We use a slightly more complex model than what's on this website, but it's a nice bottom-up way to calculate CO2 in the cloud. And it's completely different from those web tester websites that you see that say test your website to see how green it is, which is typically more a data transfer thing. So we're showing you our initial 2020 audits from Greenly. Here, as I mentioned, we have a very small office, and it's dominated by our cloud emissions, which are close to 1,200 tons CO2. We're working on perfecting this. We're essentially done with our 2021. We're just about to start our 2022 audits, and I'm going to show you what we learned from all of this. So the O of the mode strategy that we use has to do with optimize. And when we talk about optimizing, we think about it in terms of a shared responsibility model. Everything in pink is what Platform.sh does, and everything in green is what we ask our clients to consider, because we can only do this together. So what's shown on the left is high density cloud computing. So Platform takes care of the orchestration in the cloud, makes sure you have the right provisioning, and we're maximizing your resource use in the cloud. And then we really encourage that our clients also be carbon conscious and look at the carbon that is emitted from their code, and think about that. And all of this is a story about electricity being converted into CO2. So if you have an application performance monitor, an APM like Blackfire, not only can you see how your code is running, you can see bottlenecks, you can resolve it, and you can see your resource use diminish. And so this is win-win. You get this high density cloud computing, which is less resource intensive compared to on-premises, and even with your own deployment to the cloud and individual. But you get a faster final product as well. Okay, so now what does that really mean when I say it's our orchestration in the web? So we asked our carbon auditor, Greenly, to compare the way that we run instances in the cloud compared to AWS's Elastic Cloud 2. And what they found is we have two offers. And for our higher density offer on the grid, we were up to 12 times, we use up to 12 times fewer resources for the CPU usage, so up to 12 times less electricity. And then they were able to break that down in terms of production and development. So it's always good to have a third party verify the claims. We thought we were pretty good, but it was nice to get this quantified. And for our other offer, on what we call dedicated, we're up to 5 times more efficient. Okay, so now I've talked about the APM. This is an example where Good Old Games was using Blackfire and APM, and they were able to reduce their resource use by a factor of 20 and have a better performing app at the end. So we really think this shared responsibility model is the way to go in terms of optimization, these two together. Then deploy to greener regions. So this is what I've been talking about with the location base. Very often, once you have your website up and running, you can see that everything is operating well. You don't always think about it's just a click. You don't think about which data center you're thinking about. I always use this provider or what, but just to really think about the underlying electricity that is being used to support the data center. And so this is just a zoom on Europe so you can get some ideas. So mainly the Nordic countries have very green grids due to hydro power. France is low carbon because of nuclear. But there are obviously countries that have much, much higher carbon intensities. So we ask that people be cognizant of this. Again, this is from electricity maps. And so I've just given you some snapshots of numbers here, like 77 grams CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour for France. This can vary in time. And on this website, you can see second by second how the grid is varying. So again, just a snapshot, but just, we ask people to be aware of where they're deploying to. Okay, so in order to do that, we provide what we call a region picker, and so you can really compare the different offers that are available and pick the greenest region. And since we put this into place, we're really seeing a pickup with people choosing greener regions. Okay, the educate part. So this is the part I'm really interested by the input of this community part as well. So what I'm showing here are 2 articles that made it to the press about the network component in the cloud. So in 2015, well, the type of approach we were taking, this was before, well, Platform was just being started at this time, was that the network was probably dominating the electricity use and thus the CO2. And so for a while, we had been using the Shift project's 1 byte model. And then in 2020, there was this article that came out by George Kimamiya from the IEA, the International Energy Agency. And they fact-checked the Shift project model. They found an error that was substantial. And now that model has been changed, and the model that we use has been changed because of that. And that's been good news for cat videos. Okay, so to give you an overview of this change that I'm talking about with respect to the network. So initially in 2020, our audits showed that the network or transfer was, 3/4 of our carbon emissions due to electricity use. And then when we changed models, our carbon emissions dropped substantially because we were perfecting the model. This is not greenwashing. This is just understanding really how much electricity is being used. And now we understand that transfer is closer to 22%. And now we've gone back and rerun our 2020 numbers. And this is why we're a little late in getting everything out and up right now. But it's been a fascinating approach to this. And I'll just mention this is from the ADEME RCEP model, which the ADEME is like the French EPA Environment Agency, but they do a lot around energy as well. And RCEP takes care of the numeric part in France, the government component. And the Free is an internet provider in France. Okay, so just to give you, the visual of what I've just been saying. So from our perspective, this bottom-up perspective, if you want to reduce your carbon footprint in the cloud, think about using high-density cloud computing, where we're getting up to 5 to 12 times more efficient. think about, profiling your code and optimizing it. And then really the quick gain here is moving your work packages to greener regions using data centers that really run on greener grids. And so I'm going to leave you with what you can do. So I hope, if you're not already more conscious choice about where you host and, who you host with, you think about this, everything I've just mentioned here, and that you think about this more generally, because when we do carbon accounting for the entire company, we're looking at everything from the way the employees get to work, to their lunches, to the cloud computing and the way they travel. So just to give you an overview there.
Thank you, Leah.
I'll stop here and see if there are questions or comments or suggestions.
We had some positive feedback already in the chat, and then
okay,
one of our Danish members asked about network routing traffic, which I think you just covered.
Okay.
Over to you, Bernd, in the interest of time, perhaps a brief question.
Yes, I'd just like to challenge your location as a criterion to estimate CO2 produced. I mean, if Microsoft Germany, for instance, had a contract with a 100% renewable energies provider, it wouldn't produce any carbon to run my application in Germany on their server. So why should I move it to Sweden? Wouldn't it be better just to ask the provider about their use of energy and how it's certified?
So again, it's always good to ask questions and find out exactly what's happening. So what I have said here is when the PPAs or the RECs that they use are on the same grid as the actual data center, then you have location-based equaling market-based. So that's a fair point, and I kind of skipped over it, but that is a point that I make here. But the other point I would really insist on in terms of the PPAs is to look in the details of the agreements that they're signing. You can have a PPA that says, I'm going to support this project over 20 years, and it will come online in the next 5 years. Okay, so they're not quite as transparent, and at the end of the day, they're using electricity from that particular grid.
All right. Thank you, Leah. It's clear that you worked with this topic for longer than most, but thank you so much for sharing with us. It's fascinating. We're out of time, but as in the past, I'll type it up. I'll talk a little bit more to Leah. We'll polish something alongside these slides and the recording, and then I'll also send you Leah's details so you can continue the conversation about this topic and the work that they're doing at Platform.sh. Thank you very much, Leah. Thank you. Really.
Bye.